Coffee Talk. I'm Ginette Byro, and with me is Elyse Catherine, and we are two of the three mediums of Avalon Spirit. Lisa Richmond is away right now. So today we're going to dive into some aspects of mediumship and how we kind of dove into opening our abilities, opening that connection. I think sometimes mediumship has this, at least for me anyways, has this like taboo connected to it in terms of like, well, I could never be. There are mediums and then there's me, or mediums and then others, or even psychics and then others. But I think a big thing is like we all have mediumistic abilities, we all have psychic abilities. And even if we take those two labels off, we all have abilities to communicate with spirit, which really is being a medium between that world and this world and receiving messages, right? And so I think with 2022 being such a manifesting year, being based on the numerology of it, 222, plus just the energy and the way I've been reading it, 2022 seems to be a year of like, what do you want to do? The universe is going to help you to create that. And so, in terms of people deepening their connection to spirit through mediumship, their own personal mediumship, their own personal channel to spirit, I think it'd be great if we kind of shared some of our own experiences on how that opened. Like, what were some major click points for you, where it just like clicked into place, or significant experiences that you embraced, or things like that. So, what would you say was one of your most? What was the moment when you were like, okay, this is real for me?
Mm-hmm. The one analogy I wanted to make as far as everybody having intuitive abilities is I always like using the analogy of like, everybody can sing. Everybody can open up their mouth and sing, right? It might not always be in a perfect pitch or tone. It might have crackles. Some people are born like the Adeles of the world that can just belt from a young age and are incredibly talented right off the bat. Other people, maybe not as much, but they can develop. And then there's different kind of levels and skill sets that we can all get to as singers. It's the exact same thing with intuition, right? We all have the ability to connect to our own intuition and to spirit. And then we all have different abilities. We're not all born to be the Adeles of the world, just as we're not all born to be, practicing mediums and intuitives, and that's okay. And we still all have that ability to tap into at minimum our own selves and the energies around us, should we choose to want to open that up. So I was just like using that analogy because sometimes people are like, yeah, but still it's not me. And it's like, yeah, but it is. It is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, sorry, what was the question you asked? The like
Like, what
first.
was one of your click point experiences? And I mean when it like clicked into you that you're like, okay, this is real. Like, this is happening. I'm not making it up. I'm not crazy. I'm not whatever. Like, this is happening to me, kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm. I think prior to actively trying to open up and develop my own abilities, for me, it was always kind of after the fact, because I still am, but I was, especially before I kind of accessed my intuitive side more, a very like left brain thinker. And so I would often be like, oh, that's just my brain, or it's just a coincidence. Like I would really be able to kind of justify away certain things. And for me, the earliest kind of solidifiers were when I would look back and be like, oh, that wasn't just my brain. So the one that's coming to mind, and it's a strange one because I wouldn't have necessarily picked it out, but I'm just going with what they're kind of bringing forth first. For me was it was kind of a series of events. I was with a partner, a boyfriend at the time, and it was quite an unhealthy relationship. One of those ones that could have ended years prior than it did. But I remember at a certain point in the relationship, I had what I now know as an intuitive feeling of, I had a vision of myself dancing at my wedding with a person that was not this guy that I was with, that I thought we would get married and all those sorts of things. And in my brain, I think that's what I thought I wanted. And I remember being like, that's weird. Where did that come from? And years later, when we finally ended the relationship, I remember I had had a reading with somebody. And so obviously I was open to these things, but I still hadn't experienced it for myself. And I had had a reading with somebody who said, you know, me and this person had had a past life together. And there were certain things that had happened that had in that past life dampened my ability to connect with myself and my spirit. And I was actually punished for it, for doing that. And so what ended up happening after that relationship ended is all of these people, including yourself, fell into my life in order for me to really reconnect with that self. And so when I looked back, it was like there was all these kind of pieces that lined up that I was like, that's an interesting series of events. And all of the choices that I had made at that time was not with intuition in mind. It was very much with, you know, like logistics in mind. And so as these things kind of played out, I remember looking back after the fact and being like, that's an interesting way that things played out. That to me was one of the first like, there's something else that's going on that's not just my brain making decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And that's a powerful thing I think for people to recognize is when you have a series of events that unfold and usually pretty rapidly too, like kind of one after the other in a sense. That's really when the universe is speaking to you about awakening to something, but specifically with mediumship, if you have like several experiences of um, ghosty things or premonition things or whatever, like that's something to really pay attention to, right? Because the universe will help things fall into place rapidly to help you shift into some new awareness. So
Yeah. And I think for me, it was trickier because when I started opening up, I wasn't just seeing dead people. Like for a lot of people, and I think for yourself, that was some of your earlier experiences is like, who is that person standing there? That because was more and am more aligned with channeling and receiving insights that way, knowings, premonitions, things like that. I wasn't always just like seeing a dead person. So it was harder for me to be like, is this my brain or is this a thought that I'm having or is it coming from somewhere else? And I think that's an important distinction because sometimes people think like, oh, I don't see dead people, so I'm not a medium. And it's like, well, no, it's so much more than that. So I'm curious I think I know, but what was your first, like, oh, there's something here?
I mean, the first conscious thought in the moment of it, um, I think was probably when I was 15. And so that was when I saw my grandmother after she passed. And I know I've shared this story before, but for those that haven't heard it, is she had passed. We were really close, but we had never spoken about ghosts, what happens after you die. She was very religious, and so it was really weird because after she passed, I just had this knowing, this instant, solid knowing she was going to come and see me. And again, not having had many of those experiences before that, I didn't know why I was thinking that, first of all. Second of all, every night for 2 weeks, I went to bed like terrified, like literally shaking and in tears, terrified to go to bed because I was so scared of seeing a ghost, even though it was my grandmother. And it was just this knowing. So I would go to bed every night with the blankets over my head in terror, begging her out loud, please don't scare me. Please don't come and see me. Please don't do this in a way that's going to scare me. Don't do this. And I remember thinking, watching myself doing that, being like, oh my God, you nutball. Like, get over it, right? And so after about 2 weeks is when I finally started to like simmer down because she hadn't shown up. She didn't scare me. And then she came to me one night in a really vivid dream where I was sleeping in my bed and she walked through my bedroom door with her blue slacks and white blouse. And she came in and I, in my dream, sat up and was like, oh my gosh, you're here and you found a way to do it without scaring me. And she said, yes, I would never do this to scare you. I just want you to know I'm okay. And it was so vivid. It's like, even when I recall it, it's like when I recall my NDE, it's so vivid. It's still not gone from me. And that was when I was 15. So that one was really significant. And I remember when I shared it with people after, because it was in a dream state, it was brushed off as a dream. And your brain does that when to help you feel better. And maybe there was something, but like there was no, yes, spirit can communicate through dreams that way. And that is considered a mediumistic skill in itself, but it came through dream state because we're more open then. So that was probably my first like real tangible one where I really started to question it. But it didn't open until later in the story I've told many times of seeing Andre down my hallway. Um, but coming back to what you were saying with those like series of events, I think that's something that's really important for people to pay attention to is like notice what you notice. Um, if you're noticing those things starting to happen, if you actively say out loud, I saw that, or I saw that orb, right? Or even if you can't say it out loud, but in your head, if you acknowledge the spirit, like, I saw that orb out of the corner of my eye, or I see or I feel the presence of someone at the end of my bed, or I can feel you standing behind me. What is it you want? If you start to notice what you notice and then actually have the guts to acknowledge it, then that starts to make it, it almost invites it into present moment. And sorry, someone totally crashed upstairs. Um, that invites
That's
it
what
in.
you notice.
Yeah, you notice what you notice. Probably my daughter on her little whirly thing. Anyway, um, that helps kind of like bring it in or allow it to come in. And when we allow it to come in and we're not pushing so hard, it comes in with more ease and more things happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny we're having this conversation. One of my coaching clients, we're working on a couple pieces of her life, but then we're also kind of on the side supporting her intuitive development through that because they're very intertwined for her.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking this week about how all of a sudden, like there was kind of steps we were taking and moving forward with. And then all of a sudden the floodgates just opened in this last week. And like thing after thing, confirmation, like multiple things kind of happening at once. And she had said to me, I'm excited and I'm happy this is happening. And they were all wonderful things. But she's like, I'm actually feeling quite overwhelmed by this because it's like all of a sudden there's this huge, like, holy shit, this is real. Like I can believe it in my mind and I can, actively try and practice it. But when certain pieces start to come to fruition or intuitions that you had like realize or like actualize themselves in this reality. And when you see things happening that you knew were going to happen, there's this level of like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm actually much more in tune or powerful or whatever you want to say, because we all are, maybe than I realized. And, I know we've talked about this before, but this idea that like spirit really moves, especially when we're talking about like opening up or understandings with waves, right? It comes in as a wave and it can feel like a lot at first, but I think that's very purposeful that then there is that kind of as the wave goes out, things settle a little bit, because if things are coming at us too much, too fast, that is a shock to our system. It could be a trauma, right? It could be something where if there's too many things that are happening at once, even if they're good things or what we would, label as good things, it can feel like, whoa, that's too much, right? And there's an energy associated with those things. So that could be too much for our bodies, our brains, and so I think as you had mentioned in your story, you have the ability to set boundaries around what things look like, but also trusting too that, for the most part, spirit knows what we can handle and what we can set boundaries around what we like and what we don't like. But if it's a period of like, okay, I'm overwhelmed, they might start to like peel things back a little bit and give you some space to kind of integrate what you've opened up to or what you see. And sometimes then our brain's like, oh, it's done. It's not working anymore. I've lost it. But it's like, no, it's just kind of that wave in, wave out. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. And there has to be that space for us to like integrate it, because otherwise it can become too much. It can become really overwhelming.
Yeah, because especially when it starts to shake your perception of reality, whatever that is for you. I remember I had a friend who was a healer and, very intuitive, claircognizant, so I had a lot of divine knowings and all that kind of stuff. But one day, when we were sitting in session, suddenly it's like spirit started to show themselves to this person. And it was everything that I was seeing, but they were starting to visually see it. And when they started looking around the room and they're like, oh my gosh, is this what you do? You see? Do you did this? And I'm like, yes, this is where it's coming from. Even though they're well versed in the realms of healing and spirit and connecting with spirit, they weren't well versed in the visuals of it. And the visual rattled their reality, even though they believe it. Right? So there was this like, because, and I mean, I don't know, maybe spirit was doing it because there was like a talky energy to it. I don't know if like, sure, show me. And I know Spirit's done that to me sometimes before when I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally handle that. And then they show me and I'm like, whoa, no, can't handle that. Can't. Yeah, just joking. Anyways, it's like it opened up for them and then it closed back down. And I think part of that was that they were like, that's not my skill. I actually don't want that skill. And so I think there's value in that, like you're saying, like if you do open up mediumistically in a clairvoyant way and you don't like it, you can have a say, a certain amount of say in it to be able to shut it down to a certain degree. Because I want to say for me, because clairvoyance is such a natural way, I know when it started opening years ago, I wanted to shut it down because it scared me. And it was like, Spirit was like, okay, well, we'll lessen it a little bit, but this is a part of your major divine path. So, we'll tone it down a little bit, but we'll be back. And, pretty much they were. But that leads me to my second point. So, one of them is like having the ability to choose and kind of shut it down. But the other one is having the ability to choose and open it, but waiting for the timing. Because I remember specifically one time when I was saying to Spirit, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to see all the things. I will see it. Don't come right into my face. Like, don't come up right into my face, right? Stay farther away, but don't touch me, right? Like, if you touch me and I feel you, I'll freak out. Like, don't actually touch me. Don't do some physical thing. Like, I will be fine to see you, but don't actually try and touch me. And I remember I set that boundary and they followed it for years and years and years until I was like, okay, I'm ready for a fuller experience. If you need to touch me or something, whatever. And still they waited a good 3-4 months before that happened. Mm-hmm. Even after I felt that I was totally ready. So it's a long-winded way of saying, there's timings to what we deem we're ready for and what we're not ready for as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know, for myself, I had experiences when I was young that, again, for me, it wasn't seeing spirit, but my mom used to say, like, where do you know to say these things? Like, I would just say things that were not, I'd be in junior high or quite young, and I would say things. And she's like, where did you know to say that? Like, it was very prophetic or like very wise. And she would always say, you're wise beyond your years. And I'd be like, I don't know, whatever. I'm just saying things. And it took me a while to realize that when I was saying something, usually I can't remember it that well. Or if somebody was like, can you say that again? I'd be like, no, I don't know. Maybe I had like the gist, but I didn't know the wording of it. And for me, it took a while to realize like, oh, that's actually what's happening is me channeling guidance from maybe my higher self or the higher self of somebody that I was talking to or whatever the situation was. But it was one of those things too, where that would kind of ebb and flow because sometimes, I would know things or say things without me being able to know what to do with it that wouldn't necessarily be that well received, right? If I was talking to somebody who maybe they weren't open to it or, we were having a conversation and they just really didn't want my opinion or that point of view, because it's not really my opinion, but, whatever spirit was coming through. And so there was even lessons and learnings for me around like, when do I like choosing my own filter? When is the appropriate time and place for these things to come out? And feeling into, is this the right space? Because what can sometimes happen, which is another, I think, challenging thing when we're first opening up, is people who maybe don't believe it, or people who are going to challenge like, well, that's just your brain, or like, are you sure you're not just thinking a thought? Are you sure your mind isn't playing tricks on you when you see that thing out of the corner of your eye? And we can have this challenge of the voices around us, or the literal actual voices around us, not the in spirit voices around us, having opinions or disagreeing, and if you're not necessarily super grounded in what you feel or know or believe yet, that can be really challenging for us. And so I've even experienced in times where that's happening, where spirit will maybe step back a little bit and give me time to figure it out, or they'll come forward more and say, here's actually what's happening right now. And so one of the biggest things for me that I've had to learn, and even still to this day, it's challenging, is like trusting the ebb and flow of it, because they usually know a lot more than we do about what's going to best serve us in that moment? Is giving us all of these visions and understandings and knowings about something going to actually help in this situation, or is it going to hinder us?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have a different idea of what is best than what spirit will think or feel. And so that can be challenging, because then you're like, oh, well, I've lost it, or, oh, maybe this is BS, or maybe I can only, do it in these certain situations. Or we start to put kind of our like 3D limitations around it that aren't necessarily real. It's just, we're trying to kind of cope with what's happening around us, especially when folks are not super receptive.
Mm-hmm. That's a really true one. And I think in that case, when trying to kind of choose the best times to share what to share, is like, it is okay, just because you get a message, it's okay to hold on to it for a while if you're not comfortable. Or even, there's oftentimes where I'll get something and I'll say to spirit, like, okay, if you want me to talk about that, I need a little bit more understanding first. And I'll wait for them to bring in more, whether it's waiting 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, right? Like, whatever timing it is, we can always ask for more. And so I think, like, these are all equally important things, is recognizing our ability to ask and speak up for what we need in that relationship with spirit, in that mediumistic way, whether, again, it's clear knowings, like clear cognizance, clear visions and clairvoyance, clairsentience, this clear feeling and understanding, like however it opens, is having our ability to state what we want, what we're comfortable with. Also recognizing spirit has equal ability to state what they wish to share, and they have a higher view of it. So they do know what's going on. But then I think the third of equal importance is recognizing that we work together in a partnership, and that co-creation is the third part of a trinity of importance, not one being more than the other, but like if it was you and I, right? Say I'm spirit, you're you. Your opinions totally matter, as do my opinions matter, and they matter when we work together. And when we have all three parts working as a unit or a trinity, then we have this really beautiful flow of give and take, and it works in more harmony, I find. And because I think one of my things when I first started was, I thought because spirit was talking to me, I should embrace everything. And I should work in it until I am like passed out on the floor because I have no energy left. I didn't remember my own boundaries in it. Right? And so, yeah, I think that co-creation with spirit, and speaking about, like you would any other relationship, they always say, like, foster the relationship with us as you would with anyone else. Communicate, share what works for you, what doesn't, what do you like, what do you not like. And in my case of me trying to shut down the visions years ago, had I known this give and take at that point, I could have maybe had a conversation with my guides in which they would have said, okay, Ginette, we get that you're feeling overwhelmed by this. We're going to take this away, but this will be coming back for you because it's a part of your plan, your blueprint, right? But at that time, I didn't realize we could have this give and take conversation, and it was just really kind of one-sided. So I think that's a valuable piece in it too.
Yeah. And, I kind of feel like I want to bring up too, that going on a similar but different tangent a little bit, the idea of, this is another conversation I had with a client this week around like the balance of knowings, intuitions, as well as our free will, as well as the blueprints or the plans that are laid out for us. And I think sometimes people, and myself included, was that I really struggled with this, was like, what's the balance? What's the balance of follow your intuition? There's a plan for you, but also I have free will. How does that work? And I think it's this super complex, like if we could put it in a really linear, logical way, to me, I see it as like this insanely complex matrix of possibilities where maybe before we, come down onto this earthly plane, we're like, I kind of want to set out to learn about sorrow and heartbreak, but I also want to learn about divine love, and I want to learn about healing and da 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 da. And then all of my like soul people are like, yeah, okay, cool. We're going to come in here and da da. We've kind of got a plan. And then you come down onto this earth, and we have to remember and reconnect with our intuition, and we have to relearn because it's conditioned out of us to such a degree. And then maybe we decide to reopen to that, or maybe we don't. And then it like with every decision that we make, there's a branch off of infinite amount of outcomes or things that could happen in relation to those decisions. And when we start to then follow our intuition, maybe we start to become aligned more with the original blueprint or the original learnings that we were set out to have, but there's still always free will. And so where I'm going with this is like, I had an intuition that the person that I was with, I wasn't supposed to be with for the rest of my life and that it wasn't going to work out. But at that moment, as my human self, I wasn't ready to end the relationship. Even though I knew in my intuition, okay, this isn't the person, it didn't feel right for me to end it. Could that have been because of human reasons? Like I was afraid, or what if I didn't find somebody else? Yeah, there was probably that. But there was also a lot of learnings that I still had. And so maybe the intuition was, okay, you could end this relationship now. But if you do that, you might have those learnings that are left undone or unlearned. Those might show up in a different relationship. Or you could stay in this relationship for a little while longer, knowing that probably not the end game, but learn some lessons, then you don't have to learn them in the next relationship. So I think there's like, sometimes people get afraid of like, well, what if I don't listen to an intuition right now because I don't feel ready or whatever reason? And it's like, they're always going to be trying to support you in line with your overall plan and the learnings that you have agreed for yourself. And there's always our free will. And we could say like, screw all this, and I'm going to go this opposite direction and ignore all these things. And maybe those lessons will continue to pop up, or maybe, they'll come up in a different life. But I think people get afraid. I've experienced, and I know I've experienced this, but I've heard it in other people, that it's like, I'm almost afraid to tap into my intuition because if I don't listen to it, then I'm screwing things up, or I'm going to miss out on something, or I'm doing it wrong. And it's like, no, I don't think that's the case. I really feel that no matter what decisions we make in line with intuition or not, we're always going to be supported towards the best outcome. And we can make decisions on and on and on from there infinitely until we're no longer here.
Yeah, I really like that. About really being that active participant in our lives. Because as much as mediumship is so cool, I gotta say, I love it. I love it. I really enjoy it. We can't spend all our time there. We have to also spend equal parts time as the human person doing the human things, right? Like that has as much of value too. So I like what you're saying. Like sometimes it's exactly that. You may know that something has run its course or is on the way of running its course, but if you're not quite done with it yet, then you're not done with it yet. The human you is not done with it yet. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful statement.
And I think too, sometimes that's why I don't know if you've had this experience. Sometimes spirit will say like, you should do this or you should do that. But for me, I find a lot of times they come through and they're like, here's your options. Here are the potential outcomes. And I think sometimes people come to readings, and I've done it too, where I'm like, okay, spirit, what do I do? And there's not that many times, both in readings or in my own experiences, that they've been like, here, do this thing.
Yeah. Especially
when it comes to like big life choices. I've been strongly pushed when it comes to like, do I take this leap, or do I, like those things that might feel like risky, sometimes they'll help edge me towards that, because it's like, I've already made the decision, I want to do it. They're just helping to kind of facilitate that. But in situations where it's like, do I do this or do I do that? They don't often say you have to do this, or like, this is the one choice, do that thing. It's more, here's what we're leaning towards for you. But if you don't do it, here's, some of the outcomes in this direction. And I think sometimes that's hard for people, because it's like, well, just tell me what to do. But I don't think they'll ever want to take away our free will, because that's the fundamental part of being human.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that, because I know we kind of ran a tangent there a little bit, but I loved it. It was so good. For those that want to further open their mediumship skills, their connection with spirit, what would be, or do you have like a top 3 things that you have done or do on a regular basis that helps you improve your connection with spirit?
Yes. So the first one coming to mind is, for me, making, especially early on, I don't do it as much anymore, but even lately they've been like, hey, start doing this, is writing down and like making tangible note of the things that you notice, even if they seem like, I don't know if that was a thing. The more you do that, because it's easy to forget that these things happen, right? In our day-to-day busy lives, there's a lot going on in the world. So noticing, and I like to write it down because I have a terrible memory, so I will forget. Because you can come back to those things and be like, wait a sec, I thought I had an intuition about that. And then you go back and you're like, oh, actually I did. Look, I felt this thing was going to happen and it did. So writing it down, keeping note of things, I think is really valuable because it also takes it out of your brain and makes it real. And that makes it easier to remember and kind of circle back to. The second one for me would be spending time like actively tuning into it. So when we say like, oh, we're tuning in, I used to be like, well, what does that mean? For me, it's like closing the eyes, meditating, but also being intentional about asking spirit to connect with me, show me things in my highest good, the highest good of my client or my loved one or whatever it is that I'm doing. And just opening up and seeing what I get, and spending time in that quiet space. And then the third thing I think for me would be also like, how would I say this? Not spending all your time in it. I think when you start to open up, it's like you get so excited, and it's like, especially when you start getting confirmation about things. And one of my challenges was I became so ungrounded early on because I never wanted to like come down from spirit, and they all just shut it off. First of all, they'll be like, sorry, too much. You need to slow your roll. But you also are still here to be
more candy for you.
Yeah. You're done. Mother says no more. But yeah, like you're ultimately here to be a human. So don't get so caught up in always trying to be up, connected, head in the clouds, because that's not what we're meant to do here. And also it's a lot for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Those are great. And those are like, they're quite similar to what I would say as well. Those are things that I do regularly too. So that's like, I agree 100%. I think if I was to pick three others, and they're sort of similar in one sense, one of the things that I had to kind of click into place again, and I keep saying this word like click, like what clicked for you? And it's when you just, when you have those shifts of realization where it just clicks into your reality, like it is a part of how you are. It's like that. So one of them that I did was believing that they hear me. Because I know in the beginning I would wonder like, okay, if I'm not speaking to them in meditation, do they hear me? If I'm speaking in my mind, do they hear me? Spirit always hears us because energy is energy. So whether the energy goes by thought, by actual voice, by writing, they're going to hear you. And so what I've done is I've just like bypassed my most efficient process. So if I really want to talk to spirit, I'll literally talk to them out loud. Like I'll be washing dishes or driving, or if I have a point to make, I can easily ask them in my head. But for my own value of just cutting to the chase, that I know it's been said, I know it's put out in the universe, I'll talk to them out loud. And I will talk to them as same as I would anybody else. I'll be like, hey guys, okay, I really need some help on this. What is this? Can you show me this? So on and so forth. So I found speaking out loud has helped me be even more intentional in my communication with them, and trusting that I know they hear me, right? So I kind of figure if I've heard myself say it with my own ears, then I know they've heard it and I can kind of let it go. So that's one of them. The other one is looking for the synchronicities, kind of like you said, like giving space for the synchronicities to appear. And an example of that was just yesterday. The weather is still really cold here. Again, not as cold as it is for you guys, but we're still winter. And I was walking to pick up my kids at school, and I was talking to spirit in my head, and I was like, can you guys give me like a really distinct symbol if what I'm understanding of this certain thing is accurate? Like, can you guys, I'm just putting it out there. Again, at this point, I'm talking in my head because not all the parents at school need to see me talking to nobody. And sure enough, I kind of ended up being there first, which normally I don't get out of my car first because that would be chilly. But it was like this encouragement to get out of my car. So I get out of my car and I go walk around behind the school where I wait for where my kids get out. And I hear spirit be like, go stand by the wall. And I actually prefer to stand by where the garden beds are, which is opposite of the wall, right? Because this is a blank wall. And for whatever reason, I'm walking towards the wall, and in my head, I'm like, that's funny that I'm going to stand by the wall because I never want to. And sure enough, I look at the wall, and there's this little tiny ladybug right on the wall, right? And the ladybug is a symbol for me that is like a yes. When I see a ladybug, it's a yes, it's a good luck, it's a right direction kind of thing. And it was like they brought me right over to that wall to see it, which was answering my question. And there's not a lot of ladybugs out this time of year, right? Um, so being open to how those synchronicities can answer you, because sometimes it can be really quick. That one was a quick call and answer. And I find the more I've been willing to open to it, sometimes the faster the call and answer is. And then the third one would be is recognizing when a thought, vision, or idea comes to you faster than you can think it. Like if you're asking a question and the answer is coming in before you're even done with the question, that's often from spirit. Or if a random insight comes in when you're not thinking about it, say I'm thinking about my grocery list, but a random insight of, I don't know, my mom's foot twisted or something, right? Comes in out of nowhere, but I'm thinking groceries and there's no relation to it. That's usually from spirit too. So pay attention to the random bits of info that come in that don't have a root in your own brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And there's one more thing too that I was going to say before, and it left my brain, but try not to take it too seriously. Because I know sometimes like we get excited about it, or, you know, we do take it seriously because when I'm doing readings, I do take it very seriously because I am connecting to people's loved ones and their energies. And there's a certain level of vulnerability that comes with that, right? When you go to a reading. And so I do take it seriously, but when you're, you know, if you're not practicing or you're not, you know, doing this for a living, but you're just working on opening up and tuning into your own self, I think sometimes it's like, this is serious business and like spirit and we like want to learn and that's great. But sometimes when we get really serious about it, we almost shift into that left brain that blocks us a little bit, when really like the lightness and the freeness, that's the energy of spirit. It's not like serious business. Even if they have serious business to talk about, it's not from that place. And so we kind of can almost inadvertently block ourselves when we put a lot of like barriers around it, or okay, I'm only going to believe it if you show me X, Y, and Z, or if you come into a reading expecting, give me the code word, or, you know, you want something in a very certain way, or you're, you know, asking for repetitive things over and over and over again. Sometimes that energy of like, I'm really serious about this can kind of block you. And then almost feed into the doubt that might be there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's beautiful. Lightheartedness is so important. I just did a post on this yesterday, actually.
Oh,
It's
really?
funny that came up. Yeah, about like how laughter is like such a key thing that does flow through spirit, and it isn't about being so serious. And I know you and I both have had like times where we have taken it way too
Oh, yeah.
seriously, right? Where it was like, okay, we need to like get out of this and shake it loose, go do something ridiculous, like take a break, right? And luckily we can kind of tell each other that too and bounce that off each other as well, which is great. But yeah, I think that's a great point. Not take it so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Well, that was lovely.
That was fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. So thank you guys all so much for joining us. If you want to dive into your abilities and mediumship further, I do teach a course, a Lightworker Mentorship Circle. You can find it at avalonspirit.com. It's a great way for you to learn your skills if you want to go further than what you learned here today. And also, if you haven't already, check out the Avalon Spirit Facebook group. There's lots of great insights, information that's available on there all the time. And lastly, if you haven't yet and you're enjoying this content, please do subscribe and share it with somebody. If you've had a conversation with someone recently who has been talking about these things happening and they're wondering if they're crazy, maybe share this and it might help them feel normal and have some ways to navigate it. So again, we thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you again next week.